Wonder Woman 1984 is written and directed by Patty Jenkins and stars Gal Gadot, Chris Pine, Kristen Wiig, Pedro Pascal, and among others. And this is the sequel to 2017's Wonder Woman, and is also the ninth film in the DC Extended Universe. And in this film, it's set in 1984, where we deal with Diana Prince, who is now working as an anthropologist in the Smithsonian Museum, if I pronounced that correctly. And she ends up discovering, well, after a shakedown with a robbery that goes down at the beginning of the movie, she discovers that there's this relic that comes across that, not going to go into too much spoilers, but essentially it creates pretty much power for those who obtain it. And I'll leave it from there because I'm not going to go into spoilers, but let's just say that it creates pretty much the, as they call it, the MacGuffin of the film, where it uses a plot point to advance the plot along. And as you've seen from the trailers, it also deals with her pretty much getting reunited with Steve Trevor, played by Chris Pine, once again. And she also ends up meeting this woman named Barbara Minerva, who's played by Kristen Wiig, who is this kind of insecure, kind of like Selena Kyle equivalent from Batman Returns, who's very, kind of dorky and just, insecure, and she just wants to envy Diana Prince and try to be like her. And on top of that, you're also dealing with a businessman named Maxwell Lord, who's played by Pedro Pascal, who wants pretty much more power to save his oil company. And it basically it has to deal with a lot of themes of having so much power and everything, and that can go into the extreme. And now here's some backstory for you. Now, if you've seen some of my videos, a lot of my videos I put on my channel within the last several years, I've talked in length about the DC films and DC Extended Universe films in particular that I've seen. And, like, to recap, I felt like this universe has been kind of, like, good, but it kind of has its flaws, where it's trying to be at. There have been some good movies I've enjoyed, especially that I personally have enjoyed, like Man of Steel, the Ultimate Edition of Batman vs Superman I liked. Suicide Squad, I actually am an unpopular opinion. I actually really enjoy that film a lot, and I also got to really love the first Wonder Woman that came out in 2017, and it made my best of list. And I felt like this is a universe that I think probably was kind of having its hard foot in the ground when trying to catch up with, like, say, Marvel, for example. Because it seemed like maybe if they would have took their time and maybe start out more with the solo films, we could have probably get more of, like, get an idea of, like, who these characters are and everything as the universe built up. And I think that really showcased a lot when we got movies like Wonder Woman and Aquaman that were able to give us more of, fleshed out points with the characters that you would later see them team up with in Justice League and all that. So I think that going forward, now that we've seen movies that have kind of took on the realm and added more, like, lighthearted tones, like Shazam and even Aquaman and all that, I think now that DC is kind of just relying more based off of their current material than having to stick with their traditional dark stories, even though they kind of mix it up in certain parts of their films. Which is basically what I've been hearing that Zack Snyder is sticking with his original cut with Justice League, which I'm actually looking forward to. So the universe overall, I think, could have had a lot better writing as far as, like, where we stand as far as doing a lot of build up more. But with that being said, though, I will admit that I actually got interested seeing the trailers for Wonder Woman 1984, and I liked the whole 80s vibe they were kind of going for in the trailers. And while I wasn't, like, overly hyped for it, I still, had hope that, maybe this was going to be one of those films that continues the line of DC films that have been actually consistently good, surprisingly, that I've enjoyed, including last year when we had Shazam, and I admittedly actually didn't mind Birds of Prey, even though it definitely could have been a lot better. I just think that it was a fun movie. So there are films that I enjoyed that I'm just trying to say I haven't fully disliked a DC film. The only one I think that I really would just found kind of like in the middle ground, so to speak, was probably the theatrical version of Batman vs Superman, but that made up for it with the Ultimate Edition. So that's really more the only ones that I can say I wasn't, like, 100%, completely on with, but I still liked the movie. Now, getting into this film, this was a film that also took its time with trying to actually come out because, as you know, we've been dealing with the pandemic going on, and we were supposed to get it in the summer, and then it got delayed until August, and then it got delayed again up until, actually, of all things, Christmas. And we also heard that since they announced that they were trying to pretty much get more success with HBO Max, especially with the Zack Snyder's Justice League being aired, Warner Brothers decided to pretty much do a test by putting the movie into theaters and also on HBO Max. Possibly also due to the fact that they weren't possibly getting a lot of their revenue back with Tenet that came out over the theaters. So, well, even though it slowly started to get its profits back. So I can see this test that they were doing with this, and I appreciate those that have the ability to watch it at home and everything, especially for those that can't get out. Me, I guess it's always been kind of my thing where I love to go watch superhero films, and this was the first DC film I've seen at the IMAX theater that I went to go check out with my mom and dad, and this is the first one I've seen since Justice League, of all things. So, yeah, and after finally seeing it, I gotta admit that while it does have its flaws that hold it back a little bit, and while it's not quite as like as like high grade as like I would compare with the first movie, I still enjoyed the movie really good with Wonder Woman 84, despite its flaws. So to get my pros out of the way, I will say that once again, Gal Gadot really shines as Wonder Woman this time, and what I appreciate about her character this time is that it takes a more like story-driven realm with her and her relationship that builds with Steve Trevor, and to an extent, I think it really showed a lot of the emotional impact that it shows her as a character, and the way that she also has to speak, and basically show a lot more of the vulnerability this time, because there's actually points in the film where she actually does get hurt, and she actually, you feel her on the edge, and I like the fact that they pushed more of the stakes with her this time. And I also got to appreciate a lot of the, not going into spoilers, but there's also a message that I really enjoyed about her character arc that has a good impact the way that it pays off in the end with its climax. But I'll leave it there because I can't really go into detail without spoiling. But getting my other pros, once again, I also enjoyed Chris Pine back as Steve Trevor. I'm mixed as far as his character's like actual purpose in the film, that I felt could have been added a lot more with, and maybe given more of a purpose with, because while I love their chemistry together, it's always very charming and genuine like it was in the first film. And there are a lot of good awe moments where it's him pretty much trying to be pretty much the fish out of water this time compared to how she was in the first film. So the roles are reversed. But I appreciate the fact that it shows a lot of the dynamic between them, and there is something that happens very emotional that I'll admit I actually kind of got a little teary-eyed. Not I didn't actually cry, but I felt an emotional impact that the movie took when it comes with his character. And so I appreciated that aspect of it, and I'll get into more of my cons with as far as the writing for his character later on, because I'll get into that. But once again, like I said, it does stick with the very good relationship that builds with them too. The other praises I got to admit the most is I appreciated a lot of the way that the movie takes more of its time doing as a more story-driven aspect. Even though there's a lot more action they could have added with the film, I appreciated that Jenkins was kind of going for a more, and I know it's going to be an unpopular comparison because a lot of people don't, this polarized a lot of people how it reacted. They basically took the Last Jedi approach, where they were focused more on telling the story as opposed to just putting action scenes every 5 minutes or so. And you know what? I can appreciate what they were going for because it did have a good build-up with it, how it played out. And I like the way it progressed with the story. Granted, it is slow pace, which I'll get into later as that is one of my little minor flaws, I will say, kind of held it back. At the beginning, it was kind of slow paced, and there was some things that they could have maybe trimmed out just a little bit, but I still appreciate that they were trying to dive more into developing, Diana's character and everything, and being able to really showcase of what she has to go through. And in addition, I also got to appreciate how this movie, its storyline-wise, it builds more of like a devastation plot that I actually thought was, even though it's cliche, I know, it still felt pretty good. It felt like the stakes were higher this time. And that is something I can appreciate a little more in this compared to the first one. But to get to my cons later, there are things in the first one I prefer way over this one as well. So the villains I actually thought were pretty good this time. Unlike Ares, who I thought was kind of misused in the first film, this time I can appreciate they brought in villains that I actually not only liked the actors and actresses that played them, but also I did actually feel like it was a genuine threat this time. And I'm going to get into this now. I'm going to talk about Pedro Pascal. Now, this is a guy that I've actually been enjoying his work and seen in movies like, surprisingly enough, movies like Kingsman, The Golden Circle, and his very most iconic role in The Mandalorian. And so I've really enjoyed the guy as an actor, and I think that he played not only it very charismatic and over the top in a good way, but I just really liked how he felt like, a kind of very smarky type guy that actually also has a good, balance of playing it very like that, but also in serious parts too, because there actually is some cool stuff that they add with him that I thought worked, especially with him, and there's a subplot going on with him and his son, and his son's basically trying to get his son to accept him for who he is and everything, and his son just wants to see him as a good dad and everything, and I thought it was very genuine, and I thought it added a whole lot of emphasis. It added a good new depth to his character as a villain, but and so I thought he did great, and I also really appreciate how this pretty much when he's going through as a villain, he really does put more into a lot more of putting the stakes higher, and like I said earlier, showing the devastation of how pretty much everything is basically filmed like, I'll just say it like this, it pretty much becomes like Avengers Infinity War, where everything is just like going fucking nuts. Now, the other thing I gotta admit too is Kristen Wiig. I actually didn't mind her in this movie a lot. She was actually another villain that I enjoyed, and I'm not really the biggest Kristen Wiig fan. There are movies that I don't mind her in, like Paul, the other one she was in called The Martian and things like that. And there was, surprisingly enough, she was also another one I enjoy called Mother. But I'm not really the biggest fan of her when it comes to comedies and stuff. But I think that when she plays like kind of more like serious and kind of more roles where she's more subdued and nuanced, they add some. I thought she really pulled it off here, and I thought that she really did a great performance playing as kind of a klutz at first, and even though they use this cliche where you've seen countless times, where if you've seen Batman Returns, Batman Forever, Amazing Spider-Man 2 and all that, where they show the person that's basically obsessed with the person and stuff, and they eventually become a villain. It is a cliche that I will admit they need to fix and try to do something completely different. But it worked in this regard because I did like the way that it played it out, where she envies Diana Prince, and she actually they do add some layers to her that I thought kind of worked too. I did feel like they could have added more of her character as far as a writing standpoint, because again, to get into my cons later, they do feel like they could have had a better closure with both her and Pedro Pascal's Maxwell Lord. But I'll get into that more later. But for what they do with her character, though, I thought that she basically became like a good force against Wonder Woman, and she's basically like the anti-version of her, that she basically meets her match, and I thought it really worked. And I even thought, not gonna lie, there's actually parts in the final battle when she turns into Cheetah, it looks good. Maybe help with the lighting. I don't know if this is just me, but I didn't mind too much of CGI, but to an extent. So again, there's some certain things that are good, but then there's other things that's like, it's really kind of cringy there. But I'll get into, like I say, more of my cons here later on. But going into further with the movie too, what I also appreciated the most is I love the whole 80s vibe, where it feels like, for the production design, the way it plays it out, and the lighthearted tone they go with, it is feeling much more like a comic book movie that you would expect in this regard. And a lot of the 80s vibe is there, and while it is more of a nitpick that they could have really added more, like they could have actually added 80s songs to the film. Hans Zimmer's score is another pro I can really give a lot, and his score really does feel very emotional as usual. And granted, there are a couple of key moments where they film some other scores that aren't from Hans Zimmer, like not that they use, but still, when it worked in context with the film, I still thought it still held me on a very emotional level, and I was actually, in almost tears of joy, hearing his music. And I got to also appreciate too that the movie has a good like heart to it, and the message that it does with basically having like too much power and having to accept yourself for who you are, I think is a good. It shows a good theme of not only Wonder Woman's arc, but also how it sees with some of the other characters in the film too. So I appreciate that. And there are some good action scenes that I enjoy, but nothing really to write home about compared to the first one. So the action is good, but it's nothing like really memorable this time compared to the first film. So, but it is completely directed, and it does get you on the vibe of what you expect out of seeing Wonder Woman. It just could have been a lot more, but I digress. Now here's where I kind of get into some of my cons. Well, like I said earlier, the film does take its dealing with like the themes of having too much power and everything like that. The way that they actually write out the villains, I felt to an extent it worked, but then it felt like it didn't have much of a resolution when it came to it. And there are questionable motives that I did kind of I could see what people were criticizing when it came to Maxwell Lord's motivation of what he was actually doing. And I feel like there was some things that they really could have, added more depth with to really flesh out more of him, and also Barbara's, Cheetah's characters the most, because it felt like to me that when they got to the end, it was almost kind of like they kind of rushed it, and we just have like basically like a quick fight with Cheetah, and it should have. And when they do wrap everything up, it feels like we should have had at least some other type of conclusion to see what happens. So that was really my only biggest issue as far as like the villains' writing concern. And then on top of that, there are some things that were kind of questionable, like, not going to go into spoilers, but they could have also really developed more of what we got with Wonder Woman's like golden armor that she wears. There is something I will admit works in the regards to it that, not going to spoil anything, but let's just say that when she goes into depth about her history with the golden armor, there is something clever I thought was pretty cool that paid off in the end with it that I won't reveal, but I'll give you a hint. Just watch the mid-credit scene. I'll go from there. Just watch the mid-credit scene. But yes, there's some things that they really could have attached onto that I thought could have worked a lot better with that. On top of that, that's why I also have to give my other biggest con really is the fact that you have Steve Trevor coming back, and I get what they're doing with trying to develop further their relationship with her and Diana, with her and Steve. It's just that they really feel like they could have done something a lot more like a big payoff with his character as well. Like there is an emotional triumph that happens, but I felt like there could have been something that could have further developed with his character per se that probably would have worked a lot more and gave us a very higher emotional impact than what we got. Even though I still enjoy what we got, I still felt like there's more that they could have really expanded way more with. So that's really my biggest issues I have with the movie itself, is that it does have kind of a drop in when it comes to writing, because there are, like we were saying earlier, there's some cliches that happen, and I know a lot of people were divided as far as how the movie played out with its questionable with its questionable like scenes of tonal shifts with that are out there, like at the beginning with the mall scene and stuff. But honestly, it didn't bother me too much, because I think what the movie was trying to really go for in a good way was it was trying to be like a good kind of throwback to like movies like the original Superman film. It was kind of honoring the original Richard Donner first two movies in that regard. Which, if that was their intention, it actually worked, because even though I haven't fully watched the original Superman movies, but the first two, but I've seen pieces of them, that just from watching of them, I can see the tone that they were kind of going for this time, and kind of mixing in some of the serious stuff to an extent. So with that being said, though, I mean, there's more I could go into detail, but again, it's really hard to really talk about without going too much with spoilers. I did feel like the movie did still feel what I expected out of a follow-up to Wonder Woman, and hopefully when they do the third one, I am actually wanting to see them actually follow up and actually give us the Wonder Woman that we see in modern times. We already got it in Justice League and Batman vs Superman, but I think it's finally time that we see her in modern times as the Wonder Woman that we saw from, well, in this case, Zack Snyder's other films. So here's hoping that they actually get into that in the future. But I am still going to say I enjoyed it, and I don't know where it's going to rank because I haven't really seen a whole lot of films this year. If it makes anywhere on my list, I might put it possibly as an honorable mention, or maybe like if I don't have any other spot, I'll probably put it like in maybe my top, my number like 8 or 9 or somewhere. I don't know. I'll have to find it somewhere in this. And if it doesn't make it, then you know, it still would become close to it. So I did really enjoy the film a lot. And with that being said, I'm going to give Wonder Woman 84 a low phenomenal grade on the Film Freaks meter. So for those of you who have also seen Wonder Woman 84 and also the other films in the DC Extended Universe, let me know in the comments below what you thought about it. And I know it's late to the game here, but happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and Happy New Year coming up. And stay safe, and thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next review. I'll see you later.